When dealing with the universe, space, time, or any of it really, you can never be quite sure what actions will lead to what consequences. Trying to predict the future is almost impossible. I mean, hell, trying to predict a UFC main event is hard enough. But with the benefit of hindsight, we are able to look back at key moments, at least in the sport of MMA, and clearly see a butterfly effect, where two fighters met at a crossroad and both careers were changed forever. Sometimes though, two fighters that were meant to clash never actually stepped into the cage to fight each other, and if they did, the entire history of the sport may have been changed forever. I hope you've got snacks and you're ready to relive some sliding doors moments. Because I'm Bailey from MMA On Point, and as always before we start, I want to give a special thank you to all of those MMA On Point Hall of Famers, the channel members, and these are 10 cancelled fights that altered the course of MMA history. Number 10, Gard Musasi versus Michael Bisping. Going into 2016, Michael Bisping had been in the UFC for 10 years and he'd seen the middleweight division go through some changes. Most recently, the arrival of all the Strikeforce fighters who had now slowly taken over the division. Gard Musasi was one of those guys who had finally been picking up some steam until he lost to Uriah. But Mike and Gard were both veterans of the MMA world at this point, and the UFC booked them for a fight night in London. And in the lead up, it was pretty respectful.
He's a dangerous opponent. He's good everywhere and he's very composed. His composure, I think, is what makes him so dangerous. You could argue that he is a boring bastard.
But something magical happened to Mike that Christmas. He got a phone call from Dana White and he was told he'd no longer be fighting Gard Musasi. He had a new opponent in London, the iconic former champion Anderson Silva. I think the UFC just wanted to capitalise on having Bisping in London, and the fight with Anderson Silva turned into an absolute classic, and with a win over the legend Silva, Bisping had perfectly aligned himself for a title shot. Honestly, this cancelled fight worked out pretty well for Mike. For Gard, he instead got Talis Latis, which was the first in a line of opponents he would beat. I mean, Gard pretty much got pushed to the side during all of this until he just got fed up and left the promotion for Bellator. Number 9, Anthony Pettis versus Jose Aldo. Back when cross weight class fights were still an extremely rare occurrence, we almost had a matchup of two of the greatest strikers of all time when the featherweight champion Jose Aldo had run out of opponents, and instead of waiting for a shot at the lightweight title, Anthony Pettis was willing to change weight classes and take on the champion. After fans had seen Anthony's WEC career alongside Jose Aldo's, where both men held the titles at the same time, it was pretty exciting that they might actually eventually fight. But even though it was scheduled, unfortunately it would never take place.
I've seen a couple doctors, they're all saying maybe surgery, maybe not surgery. I tore my PCL. Actually, I tore it in the Henderson fight. If it's surgery, 6 to 7 months. If it's no surgery, 6 to 7 weeks.
Jose would go on to face a Korean zombie instead. But just imagine if this fight did happen. Both guys continued on an upward trajectory. Jose was racking up title defenses, a streak that would only be broken by Conor McGregor, who in turn needed Jose Aldo and that streak to become such a massive star. Pettis was on a win streak himself that led him to the lightweight title, a Wheaties box, and a career in the UFC fighting other legends as a former champion. One of those guys had to lose if that fight went down, and that would have for sure altered the history of the sport. If Pettis beat Aldo, he would have claimed that legacy, and who knows who Conor McGregor would have fought. And if Jose got the win over Anthony, then he may never have become a lightweight champion. Number 8, Shamrock versus Kimbo. Long before quite possibly one of the worst high-profile fights of all time took place in Bellator, Ken Shamrock and street fighting legend Kimbo Slice were supposed to fight in an old promotion called Elite XC. Now, if you're a newer fan, imagine a time, if you can, when other promotions outside the UFC could pay to have some of the biggest stars, and a company like Elite XC was shelling out.
I'm going in against a guy that's really popular, has come onto the scene and really done a lot for MMA. I get an opportunity to go in there against one of the biggest crowds in MMA history and put a beating on him.
But it was a big fight at the time, and sure, maybe Kimbo had holes in his game and Dana White had been shit talking him, and also maybe Ken was already a bit too old for even this one.
When I come out on Saturday and Ken Shamrock comes out there and a healthy Ken Shamrock, there's going to be a whole different world that people are going to see.
It was going to be a massive show. Kimbo was easily their biggest pay-per-view draw. But as fate would have it, on the day of the fight, Ken Shamrock's got a cut and had to pull out. The fight was cancelled, but Elite XC didn't want to cancel the show, and they put in Seth Petrozelli, an ex-UFC fighter that no one in particular really apparently cared about. And he went in there and knocked out Kimbo in just 14 seconds.
Slice goes down. Oh my goodness! Slice gets pounded out. Oh, what I say? What I say?
It didn't last very long, only 14 seconds. So what exactly happened?
Just kept him off with my teep, with my front kick, and then he ducked his chin a little bit, and I just came right over top and hit him with my right, and he went down fast. I was like, oh, I didn't expect him to go down like that, but saw the blood and just went for the kill and just kept barrage punching him.
Look, safe to say Kimbo's career might have been a bit different if that didn't happen. Shit, maybe it would have changed Ken's trajectory, but Seth Petruzelli let it slip in a radio interview that Elite XC had hinted to me to give me money to stand and trade with Kimbo. This little comment led to an investigation backed by the likes of Dana White, and Elite XC ended up having to close its doors entirely.
The idiot Gary Shaw does an interview with the LA Times. You know, we didn't do anything wrong. There's nothing wrong with paying a guy to stand up. Well, if Seth Petruzelli can get him to the ground, the fight's over. So I'm going to bet, but you don't know the scumbag promoters, they paid him to stand up. You know why? Because they thought that Kimbo Slice was going to viciously knock him out. That's fucking illegal.
No investors or buyers backed Elite XC anymore, and that cancelled fight with Ken and Kimbo shut down an entire MMA promotion. Number 7, Eddie Alvarez versus Michael Chandler 3. If you wonder why they call Eddie Alvarez the Underground King, it's mainly because at one point in his career he won a title in basically every promotion not called the UFC. After he defended his Bellator title for the first time, he was 22-2 and considered perhaps the best lightweight in the world.
And still a Bellator lightweight world champion, Eddie Alvarez.
That's when a homegrown Mike Chandler rose from the Bellator ranks to challenge Eddie, and they had a Fight of the Year war with the challenger scoring the upset.
The white trunks. He hurt him back. He's letting go. Alvarez in all sorts of trouble. As well.
He did. Trying to take his back. Good job by Chandler.
Alvarez trying to let go with that.
Another good right hand. He could be looking for the finish here, Sean.
Stuck it.
I think those body shots just took so much out. Now he's in big trouble. Oh, another big right hand. He's hurt. He's hurt badly. Now giving up his back.
Chandler,
that's it.
There's the top, and we have a new champion. Michael Chandler is Bellator's new lightweight world champion.
They ran it back 2 years later, and the fight was just as incredible. One of the best rivalries in Bellator, and pretty much one of their only organic, interesting matchups. The rematch went to a close split decision, but Bellator president Bjorn Rebney had called it the best fight he'd ever seen.
And I didn't for a second think that we could possibly see a better fight the second time that Eddie Alvarez fought Michael Chandler. I thought the first fight was the best fight I've ever seen. Obviously now that it's 1-1, yeah, I mean, we would, absolutely, I would do it again. I would do it again in a heartbeat.
They booked the rubber match for a few months later, but to double down on the trilogy, they made it the first pay-per-view event in Bellator history, which was a big deal. This was their 120th show. However, just 1 week before the fight, Eddie had to pull out as he'd somehow picked up a concussion. Eventually, Bjorn Rebney was replaced with Scott Coker as Bellator president. By this point, Alvarez had actually been trying to get out of his Bellator contract, and unlike Bjorn, Coker was willing to just let him go instead of a long and drawn-out legal battle. But if Alvarez was still stuck in that contract, how long would his reign at Bellator have gone on for? I mean, it would mean that he never fought Conor at UFC 205, and for Chandler, he went on to fight Will Brooks twice in some pretty rough losses. And that totally changed the course of his career. And then Will Brooks left after that and went to the UFC while still champion, which completely messed with Bellator's 155-pound division even further. So a lot did happen as a result of Alvarez leaving. Number 6, Dominick Cruz versus Uriah Faber 3. The legacy of Uriah Faber's WEC career is often talked about because it simply was so impressive, and if you've ever wondered why he's such a chill guy, it might just be that after his 21-1 run as a multiple defending world champion, he felt like he'd already proved himself to be one of the best of all time. Part of that legacy was his win over a young Dominick Cruz, and although they wouldn't rematch until in the UFC, it was for a world title and Dom would go home the winner in a very close fight. Shortly afterwards though, Faber was back in contention and the UFC lined up the fight between them once again.
It's just not hard to punch him, you know, like it's not a problem.
It's just hard to hurt me.
Man, give me a break. You walked back the entire fight. You're backing up the whole fight.
Okay.
And then they also booked possibly one of the best seasons of The Ultimate Fighter of all time with the two of them as coaches. They did the whole show every week as a live episode with live fights, which meant it was a hell of a lot more exciting, to be honest. The rivalry between Dom and Uriah built throughout the season, and they were doing crazy shit like firing freaking grenade launchers. Eventually though, we found out that Dom was injured and out of the fight with Uriah, and it was being cancelled.
Dominick blew his knee out training for the fight with Uriah and has to have knee surgery now.
Now, there's a couple of schools of belief about what would have happened next if Dominick Cruz didn't get injured and if those two guys had gotten to fight right then and there. Well, for one, what would have happened if Cruz got a chance to fight the next guy in line, Renan Barão? You know, it was booked at one point until the injuries got the best of him. And of course, that all led to the rise of TJ Dillashaw.
There's the kick again.
A man Cruz went on to beat when he finally returned. And of course, if Faber had won, well, perhaps he would have finally obtained UFC gold, something he was just never able to do. Number 5, Shogun versus Rashad Evans. To win the Ultimate Fighter and stay undefeated all the way to winning a world title is something I don't think anyone else has actually done, except Rashad Evans. Say what you want about the early days of TUF, but I mean, shit, Season 2 pretty much did deliver on its promise of the modern warrior. Don't get me wrong, it didn't happen overnight, and after winning the title, Rashad lost it to the Dragon Machida, who also had his own undefeated run. It wasn't until after beating Rampage Jackson in an Ultimate Fighter Coaches Showdown that Rashad was given his chance to face off against the new light heavyweight champion Shogun. Unfortunately though, that fight would be cancelled because Rashad picked up a knee injury. And it felt like the moment that happened, a young John Jones beat the other top prospect in the division, Ryan Bader, and during his post-fight interview, they offered him the shot against Shogun, and he took it. Okay, so maybe this didn't change what happened when Evans eventually fought John Jones, but at the very least, we wouldn't have gotten that incredible performance by John when he won the title over the Pride legend Shogun. And of course, Sugar had to fight Tito Ortiz and then the up-and-coming Phil Davis in a title eliminator before he was booked in the title fight once more. And it was during that time that Rashad and John's feud built and built, with Evans clearly sick of his teammates' attitude.
Fabric is fake.
My fabric is
You're
fake.
fake.
Tell me how my fake, Rashad.
I'm not gonna get into that right here. But
Okay.
you know, I know.
Evans would leave the Greg Jackson team over this, the team he'd won the championship with.
This whole situation is awkward. It is what it is. From the minute they called that he was going to fight him, I knew he was going to destroy him.
And are you thinking of how you will fight him now? Or you haven't really
I already know how to fight him. I train with him.
Right. Will you train with Jacksons or stay at Grudge, do you know?
I'm done with Jacksons.
You're done? How come?
I'm done.
You feel as though they betrayed you?
I'm done.
You have Rashad, who's bashing the program, the history.
I made that history. What are you talking about? I'm the one who helped make that history. You came
Yeah,
into it. I helped
program.
make Greg Jackson. I helped to make him the reason why you even wanted to come there and train. So don't talk to me about the history of the team, bro.
The team Rashad would go on to help found would be the Black Zillions down in Florida. That gym eventually became Kill Cliff MMA as you might know it today, and outside of New Mexico and Jackson's Academy, Evans would go on to influence the careers of future athletes like Kamaru Usman, Rumble Johnson, Eddie Alvarez, and a hell of a lot more guys. I guess who knows what would have happened if he fought Shogun before Jones did. Shit, John might not even have become the youngest champion in UFC history. Number 4, Khabib versus Tony. Yeah, well, okay, it doesn't take a genius to work out that this fight would probably get a mention here. It was cancelled 5 times and along the way left a wake of destruction. The first time this matchup was scheduled, it was right after Khabib had sat out injured for 2 years. Didn't have that many consequences when it fell apart unless you count poor Daryl Horcher's brain cells. Or the fact that maybe at that time with Khabib coming back after the injury, perhaps it would have been the best time for Tony Ferguson to step in there and try and beat him. And if he'd have done that, the legacy of Khabib might have ended just there. Just one of many scenarios. Okay, calm down. Khabib had a rib injury, and on short notice, Tony took out Edson Barbosa instead. Not much changed, but here's where it gets interesting. They rebooked the fight 1 year later, but this time Tony pulled out with an injury. Khabib did not fight a replacement opponent, and supposedly during this time is when he signed a contract to fight Eddie Alvarez for the title. Over the next few months, Khabib didn't fight anyone, and despite supposedly signing the contract, Conor came along and took on Eddie instead.
UFC sent me 2 contract. When UFC send me contract, right? You say, UFC use my name, okay? But we speak.
We're using you to put pressure on Eddie to accept the deal.
I guess the only thing to think about is, would that win over Tony Ferguson make negotiating that shot against Alvarez a little bit easier for Khabib? It's just speculation at this point. Khabib this time though went on to maul Michael Johnson to an audience of millions. The fight was then booked again a year later. That's when Tiramisu Gate happened and Khabib had to go to hospital while cutting weight. Tony didn't fight anyone else that night, but he was the one who got a shot at the interim lightweight title just 6 months later. Now you could argue the cancelled fight between Stipe and Cain Velasquez was responsible for the UFC hastily putting together Kevin Lee versus Tony Ferguson for an interim lightweight title, but heck, Tony wouldn't have been fighting Kevin Lee if the last Khabib fight hadn't been cancelled. Either way, Tony got an interim title and it kept the lightweight division in limbo. We had the 2 best guys, but we just couldn't get them to fight each other. When the fight was finally once again booked to headline UFC 223, had that fight gone ahead, both men's legacies would have changed that night, as one of them would have had to lose. And for Khabib, that might have meant no big fight with Conor, no undefeated legacy. If Tony had lost, we wouldn't have seen Justin Gaethje claim interim gold when they were booked to face each other after this bastard curse fight fell out for a 5th time. Number 3, Fabricio Verdum versus Cain Velasquez 2. Some of even you hardcore fans might not remember this one, but back after Cain lost his UFC title to Fabricio in Mexico City, there was an effort to immediately run the fight back.
Yeah, I think the rematch in Las Vegas is a good deal.
You want to give him a rematch?
Yes, for sure.
And Vegas was great, anywhere was great really, just preferably somewhere at sea level. So UFC 196 was born to be headlined by Cain and Fabricio 2 for the heavyweight title. But obviously this fight never happened, and the fallout from this one is actually pretty crazy. 13 days before the event, Cain Velasquez has to pull out because of a back injury. Stipe Miocic steps up though on just 2 weeks notice to fill in and fight for Doom. But quite literally the next day, Fabricio also announced he was pulling out the fight because he was injured and wasn't 100% cool with the opponent change, which is pretty understandable. It just meant that there was no one to headline the pay-per-view just 2 weeks out. They shifted the entire thing from a pay-per-view event to cable television. It was the first time they had ever actually moved a card off pay-per-view. Now, UFC 151 was when a cancelled fight cancelled an entire UFC event. I suppose you could say it led to a season of The Ultimate Fighter and a Chael Sonnen title fight. You know, the fallout of that whole debacle basically derailed the division for almost an entire year. Instead, a hell of a lot of people saw the Wonder Boy take out the number 2 guy in the world, Johnny Hendricks, for free on TV. But who knows what would have happened if that fight had gone down? I mean, if Cain had actually been able to stay uninjured, you're talking about a whole lot of different scenarios there. Possibly the greatest heavyweight run of all time. The fight was eventually rebooked to headline UFC 207. That was a pay-per-view that sold over 1 million buys and will be forever known as the She's Back pay-per-view. But the Nevada State Athletic Commission would not clear Cain, and just 6 days before the fight, it was cancelled again. After they had previously cancelled UFC 196, instead of just skipping a number to 197, they just renamed the next pay-per-view, and 196 became headlined by number 2, Rafael dos Anjos versus Conor McGregor. After Conor McGregor knocked out Jose Aldo, everyone was kind of wondering, well, what was going to happen now?
60 G's, baby!
Some people were calling for an instant rematch, but I don't think that was ever going to happen. Conor, though, repeated a plan he had already laid out.
Dos Anjos won it. I chose him. When you can rack up $400 million, you can do whatever the fuck you want. I got the fucking work here. I'm coming for that belt. I'm coming for the next belt. I'm coming for the whole company.
It was still, at the time, a kind of crazy thing to ask for. Remember, McGregor was only the second guy ever to go for a second belt while still a champion. But the UFC went with it, and at 196, Conor and RDA were going to show down.
He is a free TV fighter. He has nothing else to offer me except that gold belt.
I'm the bigger man.
No.
I'm gonna bully this man in his own division.
You done, man?
I'm gonna. No, I'm not.
You done?
No, you
okay.
Fight him while I speak. I'm the king.
Yeah, go speak.
However, just 2 weeks out from the event, RDA injured his foot. It turned into a balloon, and their fight was off. But of course, who stepped in?
Conor McGregor, you're taking everything I work for. I'm gonna fight you.
Nathan Diaz. After the RDA fight was cancelled, McGregor-Diaz became a rivalry that sold some of the biggest pay-per-view numbers of all time. Conor himself only became a much bigger star off of the rivalry, and by the time he went for the second title again against Eddie Alvarez, there were even more eyes on him to see him hold up 2 belts. I mean, you could argue that helped him get the fight with Floyd Mayweather. Nick finally became a needle mover, and that led to things like the creation of the BMF title. Perhaps they would have met each other along the line, who knows, but it was only on short notice that Nate stepped up and got his chance at Conor. The fact that he beat him, honestly, who knows how different things would have looked if it went the other way. Number 1, Luke Rockhold versus Chris Weidman 2. People may have thought it was too early for Chris Weidman to face Anderson Silva, but after he beat him twice and all those guys had come over from Strikeforce, it felt like a new era for the division. Rockhold had been the Strikeforce champ, and when he got to a title fight against Weidman, it was like a title unification in a way. Either way, their matchup for the middleweight belt was a massive fight, and it was going to be the co-main event on one of the biggest cards ever, Conor versus Aldo. After an absolute war, Luke came out on top, but it was a fight both guys turned out to not be at 100% for, and considering they were still probably the 2 best guys, the 2 most popular guys, the UFC wanted to just run the fight back. It was booked for UFC 199, but the fight would of course end up being cancelled when Chris had a hernia on his neck. Now, Jacare Souza was offered the title shot, but he had a torn meniscus, so the phone call went to Michael Bisping, who stepped up on just 3 weeks' notice. Mike went in there and took the belt off the new champion Rockhold, and that changed the direction of the entire division for about 3 or 4 years. Dan Henderson got another chance to try and win a UFC title, while both Chris and Luke, instead of fighting each other, lost to Yoel Romero. But he wouldn't get a title shot because Bisping as champion was set up to have a legendary fight against George St. Pierre. And that one took ages to put together, and the division was on hold for almost an entire year. Now, GSP came out of retirement for this, and that was a big fucking deal. One of the greatest of all time going to win a second belt. Now, you have to acknowledge the fact that he might never have come back without an opportunity to win another belt and against a champion he thought he could beat in Michael Bisping. The division didn't really have a proper fight between two top contenders for the undisputed title again until Israel Adesanya fought Robert Whittaker almost 4 years after Rockhold Weidman 2 had been cancelled. I mean, heck, if George didn't come back and fight Mike, he may have gone on to fight someone else. Maybe Khabib Nurmagomedov. I guess we'll never know. Alright, a bit of a spooky look into the future, all the past in that video right there. This was a fun one to come up with. I know I kind of went off the rails a little bit in sort of speculating what might happen, but that's what makes a video like this fun, right? Thank you to Luke Taylor who edited this video. Thank you very much, Luke, for working very hard. You can go show him some love on his social media at cooltome_ or check out his new YouTube channel. Shout out to all you Hall of Famers out there, by the way. Thank you guys for going the extra mile to support the channel. There's a bunch of benefits to becoming a member here at MMA On Point. You get unedited podcast episodes, you get writers meeting access, you also get some other cool stuff. Very cool, very fun. Go check it out. Link is in the description or click the button down below. Yes, thank you very much for watching. I'm not going to swear. I know you're going to put that in, Luke. I see you. I see everything. Give us a like if you enjoyed the video and a subscribe if you're new here. We put out a bunch of videos every single week, but I thank you very much. Until next time.